Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Mayor's Pre-Summit Conversation Series. My name is Dr. Julie Bindeman. I'm a clinical psychologist and co-founder of Integrative Therapy of Greater Washington. On September 15th and 16th, Mayor Bowser will host the 4th National Maternal and Infant Health Summit, and we're excited to highlight the importance of perinatal loss and bereavement and the partner experience. For more information about the summit and to register, please visit dcmaternalhealth.com. And now on to my presentation, what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to share some slides so that everyone can see what it is that I am talking about. So I call this presentation the Unsteady Rock. And it is about the partner experience of perinatal loss and bereavement. And when I'm speaking about partners, I'm also talking about not only cisgender heterosexual male partners, but also cisgender same-sex partners, as well as transgender partners. And before I talk about what the experience of loss is like, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the partner's experience in pregnancy is like, just normatively. So how is pregnancy considered for cisgender men? Well, research suggests it's the time of joy and hope, coupled with a time of frustration and confusion. There's a sense of disreality given the lack that a partner doesn't have the physical experience that their wife might be having, or that their girlfriend or a significant other might be having, who is actually the person who is pregnant. And what we also know is paternal involvement is positively linked to health outcomes for the mother, for the child, and for the father himself. It's a really important thing to keep in mind. When we're thinking about same-sex couples, what research tells us around normative pregnancy is that there's more commitment to being a parent because of obstacles around conception. So for same-sex couples, there is no baby on earth that is conceived accidentally. All same-sex couples have to go through some kind of assisted reproductive technology in order to have their child. So that might be for gay couples, that might be adoption, or that might be using one of their sperm and having an egg donor and then using a surrogate to carry the resulting embryo. For same-sex female couples, that means the use of a sperm donor and typically having one of the partners carrying the baby. There's a sense of not being in control, which is something that gets echoed through that earlier conception process as well. And the bonds start from early on. Again, there's this idea of wanting to be a parent and that it's not accidental in terms of its occurrence. So we know for cisgender men, the emotional tasks in a normative pregnancy is to support their partner's emotional experience, to manage their own feelings around being in a secondary role since they are not the ones gestating, and so they are more relegated to the sidelines. Draper found feelings of disbelief and distance, but that contrasts with relatively more recent research that shows fathers feeling really connected during the pregnancy. So that really shows too how, as a society, we have started to move beyond that early idea, those 1950s, 1960s depictions of men being solely the breadwinners and being really uninvolved in family life. And we know that our more modern families, there's an expectation for men to be involved in family life. Men feel that they have to take responsibility for the practical tasks, which might lead to a rebalancing of roles. So even in the most egalitarian kinds of relationships in pregnancy, especially as pregnancy moves later on and it becomes physiologically more difficult for a woman to do things while pregnant, men are taking over some of the tasks that perhaps their wives had previously done before. And there's this sense of having to manage the feeling of paddling upstream. So that speaks a little more to that feeling of not being in control. The emotional tasks of same-sex couples is fairly similar. There tends to be more communication. With same-sex couples, particularly women, there can be a sense of envy that the other partner is pregnant and experiencing in real time what that feels like. But for other same-sex couples, it's a feeling of relief that they don't have to do that they don't have to put their body through pregnancy. There might be a sense of asserting oneself. Oftentimes for same-sex non-gestating partners, they get a little lost in the medical system. There's the assumption that from an OBGYN that they are just the friend, the supportive friend versus the equal partner. And then there's the overcoming of stereotypes. This is particularly for gay couples. The stereotype around nurturing, stereotypes around parenting that tend to not sway positively for gay couples. And what we know from research is that gay couples are fantastic parents and that those stereotypes don't hold true. So the tangible tasks for partners in pregnancy might include readying the space or the baby's room or readying the house for a baby. Conversations about divisions of labor post-baby. So one person might have to do more of the baby-related tasks, which means that the tasks they would normatively do, they might not have time to do. So again, that rebalancing of roles. And the legalities, ensuring both parents have rights. So this is called a post-birth adoption, and this is vital for same-sex parents. Partners in pregnancy, some of the similarities between non-carrying partners of different genders: both need to manage emotions within an unknown. Both don't have a physical connection with the pregnancy. Both need to take on tasks around readying the household, and also just taking on more of the day-to-day tasks. Some of the differences is fertility is certainly a journey needing a plan. So who will carry, who will produce the gametes, what is the treatment plan, finding medical partners, what are the finances involved? For opposite sex heterosexual partners, these are not often conversations that need to be had, assuming that there's no issue of infertility. Same-sex couples, which again contrasts from their heterosexual counterparts, same-sex couples will have to, they'll need a second parent adoption upon birth to confer their legal status as co-parent. Adoption isn't always an option with same-sex couples because of discrimination, and we saw this upheld recently in Philadelphia by the Supreme Court. A second coming out often has to happen to medical providers, and partners are not treated the same by all providers. So meaning that there has to be an oblique statement of I am the wife or I am the husband of this person, versus the assumption of parentage. A really quick lesson in language, and I think this is really important when we're working to support, in particularly our LGBTQ families. Terminology can be purposefully inclusive or can perpetuate really outdated ideas of who can be a parent. So we want to be really careful with the word biological, and rather than assume, let's ask. So don't assume it's a friend. Say, oh, help me understand, what is your connection to one another? Oh, we're married. Fabulous. So ideas for language: using parent or parents instead of mother or father, using birthing partner or gestational partner versus, oh, you're the mother. Oftentimes for lesbian couples, the person that is gestating might actually be carrying their partner's egg that was used to create an embryo. Use non-birthing partner or non-gestational partner versus father, or even worse, non-mother. There's a great video. I encourage you all to look at it. It is by Ed Sheeran. It's called Small Bump. And while there's two ways of looking at the video, one might be around the experience of waiting for a baby to be born. The way I see it, though, is it's really looking at the experience of waiting for a partner to have a pregnancy end prematurely. So being that he's in the waiting room versus with his partner upon delivery really makes me think that he's talking about the dreams he had for a potential baby and how they were ended way too soon because of some kind of pregnancy loss. So partners in pregnancy loss, when we're looking at cisgender male reactions, here's what the research says to us. Initially, the majority are in sync with their gestating partners immediately after loss. About 14% refuse to even talk about the event. And I think that number is probably less so because this research was pretty old. It's common to have an internalization of the reaction, and that's something that I continue to see. Frustration and irritability also tend to be really common responses. That tends to be due to a sense of lack of power, lack of control. They see their role as a support that, okay, this didn't happen to me. It's not really my story. It is my wife's story. There's a loss of an emerging identity. So do people still feel like they can identify themselves as a father, even if it was a pregnancy loss? And the reactions are stronger antenatally. So during that pregnancy or initial loss learning period, than as postpartum continues. There are some consequences though, so a lot of what that research suggests is that loss is seen more as a woman's issue, or the idea that it is the person who gestated, it's their issue versus a partner issue. And here's some issues with that. So it ignores the health impact that loss can create. And that health impact might be depression, anxiety, stress, disenfranchised grief, since pregnancy losses aren't seen as actual or real losses. There's a tendency to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs. And the key difference in terms of health impacts too is, was the pregnancy planned? So for pregnancies that were not planned and where partners have different ideas about how they want the outcome of the pregnancy, for the gestating person, if that was a pregnancy they wanted, there's really a sense of sadness. Whereas for the partner, if they were ambivalent or they didn't want the pregnancy, there's really a sense of relief. And so that's a really discordant reaction there. For pregnancy loss with same-sex partners, there's the sense of mutuality that we are not in control and we worked so hard and it hurts so much, and this deep sense of sorrow. There's compounded losses too with a pregnancy loss. So because, as I mentioned, for same-sex couples, pregnancy is not accidental. There's the loss too of this was no longer a normal pregnancy because it didn't come to its expected outcome. And there's also that compounded loss that the conception wasn't natural. And so that means that there's a cost associated to trying to get pregnant again. Partners tend to feel like there's a sense of strength needed for their partners. So oftentimes their feelings of loss are grieved in the shadows. The loss tends to feel really amplified. Just as I was mentioning, it's multi-layered. It's also the loss of hope, the loss of possibility, and as I mentioned before, that financial loss. So for all families, pregnancy represents that sense of hope and that sense of possibility. And so those compound the sense of loss. There's some nuances for same-sex couples. So as I've spoken to a little bit before, it's quite common for healthcare staff to misidentify the role of the partner. The laws can vary by state or country in terms of whether or not that partner is allowed to assist with the loss in a hospital setting, what kind of information they're able to get in a hospital setting. So this is a really important nuance too. There tends to be the assumption of a heterosexual norm versus just an openness that, we don't know what these two people's relationships are, whether it's a man or a woman, or whether it's two women or two men. There's certainly still a sense of stigma. There are very few institutions for LGBTQ plus identified parents that can also assist with bereavement. And it's important to keep in mind the sexual minority stress perspective, where pregnancy losses become almost non-events, which isn't what is experienced, but often what feels like it has to be hidden amongst those not within the community. So I put together some recommendations in terms of if you're working with someone or you're trying to support people after a pregnancy loss. It's really important to focus both on the caring partners and their partners, and they each need a focus individually as well as together post-loss. Assumptions are really unhelpful if you meet with a couple, especially if the partner seems like that steady rock, as that facade often breaks down over time. Support, especially in the form of others who have experienced these kinds of losses for partners, is imperative, and yet it's both hard to find despite it being so essential. It's really important to validate not only the experiences of the partner who was gestating, but also the partner who was not. And the identity experience of partners identifying themselves as parents can vary. So that might be really important to both name and honor the fact that you see them as a parent. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so excited for the summit. I hope to see you all there. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. My info is found right here on the slide. And otherwise, I hope that you have a wonderful time watching the summit. Hopefully these resources are useful. Be sure to visit dcmaternalhealth.com to register for this year's National Maternal and Infant Health Summit, which will be September 15th to 16th. See you at the summit.